One more time. Go ahead, you good.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Krystal Wilson. My partner is Miss Elsie Carnley. Today we're going to be discussing the unhealthy capital or capitalistic epidemic. We're going to compare the systematic causes of poor health in vulnerable communities and its relation to the harmful effects, and also demonstrate how this health inequality also correlates with the limited access to the facilities to treat some of these resulting diseases and disorders. The health inequalities have been established through quite a few studies, and there's a link between childhood cancer and environmental factors. Many of those come from pollution in the air, pesticide solvents, and a lot of the emissions from new toxic waste dumps, as well as sites such as Exxon and other facilities of that nature. A recent review of many of the studies show that through parental prenatal exposure and childhood exposure to these pesticides and solvents were the causes of many of the new cancers. They also found a strong link between toxic exposures and leukemia, brain, and central nervous system cancers, which account for about half of all children's cancers. The asthma rates are probably the biggest concern. They've risen dramatically to the point that asthma is now considered an epidemic among children in the United States. The rates of certain neurobehavioral disorders and learning disabilities have also been linked. Pollution and the access to health care are unequally distributed. The environmental quality, the income levels, the access to health care can all affect people's health, and usually this affects people with lower incomes, people in rural areas, and people in urban areas who have less access to health care and who are in the communities where many of these facilities are situated. The environmental pollution, as we said, is linked a lot to disabilities and chronic illnesses. And this is throughout the United States. In the poor and minority neighborhoods, they do bear an unequal burden from the hazardous facilities and waste sites. Some of the diseases, aside from asthma, are autism, and the unequal exposure to the environmental factors are usually exacerbated in these communities. Usually just living there and breathing in the air constantly helps it to actually exist at a quicker rate. And so many children in these communities rely on emergency room visits. They actually frequent the emergency room more often. And as we see here, there are less emergency room or less access to emergency rooms in some of these poor and low-income communities. One of the first cases was, for environmental justice was in Warren County, North Carolina. And this was a case where there were basically developing a hazardous waste site landfill in Warren County, and the community attempted to protest this. The community was also 84% black. Despite the low income, a large percentage of the residents owned their homes. They did not want to see this landfill situated there. The soil was contaminated with PCBs, and the experts argued that the siting of the landfill in Warren County made no scientific sense, and that it was also immediately contaminating the water because it was about 5 to 10 feet below the surface. Just going to show a quick.
We will not allow Warren County to become a dump site.
The State Highway Patrol began moving in on the marchers as they approached the entrance to the state landfill. The signs and chants of the protesters made clear their opposition to having the toxic chemical buried in their county.
I don't want the stuff thrown in my water.
We're marching because we do not want this to affect our future.
If you do not cease this unlawful act, you will be arrested.
The leaders of the protests said they would not move, and they were the first arrested. As they were being escorted away, the crowd moved in on the entrance. Many of the marchers then sat in the road, and the patrol began arresting them and placing them on a jail bus.
State officials said they had no choice but to make the arrest if they were going to move the people out of the way and get the trucks in here.
One protester jumped in front of the first truck and was quickly hustled away. In all, 10 trucks arrived for the first dumping. As they unloaded the PCB soil in the landfill, state and federal officials defended the decision to stop protesters and to store PCB here.
We were hoping that we were going to have, of course, just the protest, but you witnessed the fact that there was an attempt to obstruct, which we simply could not allow to continue.
We feel very confident that we built a facility that is going to work the way in which it was intended. And we intend to just carry this project out to its completion.
State officials say they're determined to continue the operation until they get the job done. Brenda Summers, WBTV News, Warren County.
The court rejected Warren County's federal and state law challenges, and under the Environmental Protection Agency laws, they also rejected the claim that the county had, well, they said that although the county had personal stake in the matter to have standing, it rejected that their interests were within the zones protected. So it said that they could not assert the claim that the disposal site was a public nuisance. There was also a North Carolina statute that required that those actions be brought by local health officers and not the actual residents. The county is also not a citizen within the meaning of the Toxic Substances Control Act. And so because of that, they didn't really have the authority to pursue the claim. Also, challenges under the National Environmental Policy Act and the National or North Carolina Environmental Policy Act addressed the risks association. They said that the county had standing for its claim, but the state action violated the State Administrative Procedure Act. So essentially, there is a certain agency that will come in and will say, well, they have the authority to bring the claim, and then usually when a site wants to be situated in a certain community, they will have to make an environmental assessment. And so with this environmental assessment, they will have to find if there was any significant impact to human health. If there is a significant impact, then they have to perform an environmental income statement. Now, once they pass this, then they are able to be situated in the community. In this particular instance, the court ruled that they did provide the necessary documents and they did perform the environmental income statement, and that they could be situated in this location despite all the protests and the citizens' efforts. Race is often the predominant factor for landfill locations. After Warren County landfill, the U.S. General Accounting Office found that hazardous waste landfills were disproportionately located in minority and low-income communities. The New York-based Commission for Racial Justice found a strong link between race and location of the hazardous facilities, and it found that 27 hazardous waste landfills nationwide. Out of those, a third was represented. Well, 60% of those total hazardous waste were located in 5 of the southern states, including Louisiana, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Texas, and Alabama. And those are also in primarily black zip codes. We're going to take a look at the access to health care along with the higher health risks in these communities. The high rates of asthma among minority children is compounded by the inadequate access to health care to treat the disorder. So as we know, this would require medical attention. Many of the children have little access to medical care at all, and so they're forced to go to the emergency room when they And according to the American Lung Association, the hospitalization rate for asthma is 3 times as high for Black children as for white children, and the rate of emergency room treatment for asthma is 4 times as great for Black children as for white children. The death rates from asthma are substantially higher for Black children as well. African American children from 10 to 14 are 6 times as likely to die of asthma as white children. More locally, this occurred in 2013 in Norco, Louisiana. There was an explosion at the Shell Refinery, and the diamond community of Norco fought for relocation for a while. This was a predominantly Black community before the Shell was built, and after the Shell Corporation was built, this explosion basically could be heard all the way to New Orleans. There was a state of emergency that was declared, and residents of Diamond suffered regularly from respiratory problems, headaches, and a variety of other symptoms. The children in the community, of course, suffered from asthma, but the women also were treated in emergency rooms for respiratory problems. And Shell spent a total of $3,500 to make amends, $3,000 to purchase the home of one victim, and $500 in compensation to the other victim's mother. The Exxon Refinery is located in Baton Rouge. It's the second largest refinery in the world. There have been more than 39 chemical accidents. There was a June leak in 2013 of about 31,000 pounds of cancer-causing chemicals. The Louisiana Bucket Brigade investigated them, and they found that there's been extensive pipe corrosion, inadequate emergency procedures, and inadequate staffing for emergency solutions, and a failure to follow the best practices and operating procedures. Another local case was the North Baton Rouge Environmental Association versus the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. In this case, the plaintiff environmental group sought judicial review in the 19th Judicial District Court for a grant of a plant construction permit by the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. The North Baton Rouge Environmental Association said that the grant to Exxon Chemicals for the construction of a new plant, they basically wanted to build another plant beside the one that was existing, and the community didn't want that. The permit holder applied for a permit, and as we discussed earlier, you would have to put in your environmental statement, and it was approved. So we see consistent cases where the community usually protests it, however, it still succeeds. So in order to conquer some of this, it's important for some of these smaller communities to have political standing, stronger political representation, and public participation in city council. When we examine whether the cost outweighs the benefit, the economic analysis usually will try to value human life and compare that to wealth in the communities, and this is not a good idea for environmental groups and also health groups because it doesn't consider the actual value of human life